Thanks for joining us here at The Research Her, the show working to improve the health disparities for women of color, one topic at a time. And I am Alicia. I'm here learning and growing with you as we research our way to wellness. I'm very excited to bring you today's guest. Today we will be speaking with Professor Kelly Knight, who obtained her Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from George Washington University and her Master of Forensic Science degree from Virginia Commonwealth University. She is currently a Ph.D. researcher in the College of Education and Human Development Science Education Research Program. Professor Knight enjoys staying involved in the forensic science community and has remained active in professional organizations since beginning her education in forensic science. She is an associate professor with the George Mason University Forensic Science Program and a STEM Accelerator. What I think is dope about Professor Knight is how she balances all the things, okay? She gives us STEM influencer, she's giving us mommy, she's giving us PhD student, she's giving us professor, okay? So, when we talk about phenomenal, just put her name in the dictionary as example. Use in a sentence. Boom, there she goes. So, without further ado, let's get into conversation with our great sis, Professor Knight. We have been blessed today to be talking to Professor Knight. How are you?
I am doing good, enjoying this Christmas break.
You are a professor and a PhD student. How do you do that?
I come from a crime lab. So after I graduated from getting my master's, while I was in the crime lab, I was doing adjunct teaching of forensic biology. And then I ended up getting pregnant with my first son, and we decided that we wanted to move closer to my mom. And so I left my position at the crime lab. Very sadly, actually, my husband was actually the one who pushed me because I had worked so hard to get that position. But we decided we wanted to move closer to my mom. And then this position for a term assistant professor came up at George Mason. And the minimum education requirements was a master's. So this is actually really common in forensic science programs because the terminal degree in forensic science is a master's. I think just recently, WVU is the first school to ever create a PhD in forensic science. But the thing about forensic science is a PhD in that area is really rare unless you're either active in research or if you're in forensic toxicology or forensic anthropology, you'll come across a PhD. But most people who are active case working forensic scientists get a master's, and then they go on to work in a crime lab to do forensic casework. And so the reason why you will find PhDs rare in a forensic science program is because our field is really, really heavy on the practitioner side, not the research side. So what most programs really want is they want faculty members who have experience with processing casework, with going to court. And you're not going to really find that a lot of times with people who have PhDs. A lot of times people who have PhDs and they're in forensic science, they have been in academia pretty much their whole life, so they don't have that field experience that students want. When you're teaching in the classroom, they want to hear about the dead bodies. They want to hear about the gruesome stuff. They want to hear the good stuff. They don't want to hear about the research project that you did.
Your new method that you came up with for analyzing fingerprints.
Right. And that's not to say that there isn't value to that, too, because there are a lot of programs where they try to have a balance of people who have that PhD academia research background, but they also try to pull in those master's people who have that casework experience, because that is one of the cool things about taking the forensic science classes is when you can talk about these techniques, but then you can also pull up some pictures from a case that you work and really provide that application. Our program, when I first started, was actually mostly master's level faculty with just one or two PhD faculty. But now we're actually trying to get more PhD faculty because we're trying to get this accreditation, basically, where you have to have at least half and half. So now our program is moving towards getting more PhD people. So you don't have to have a PhD to be a faculty member or full-time professor in forensic science. I really had no intention of even getting a PhD at first. So I started at George Mason in 2013. I had crime lab experience. I was now full-time faculty. I was brand new mom and wife, and I was comfortable with where I was. I'm just one of those, I guess you could call it just like a chronic overachiever. Just what I learned after I got into academia, after teaching, one thing I realized was just because I was really knowledgeable in forensic science, I realized I really didn't know anything about teaching and about education. And I tried to do research on my own, but I still was craving more knowledge in that area. And then also starting in 2014, I co-founded a STEM program for underrepresented females. And we were starting to do some assessments, and I was just really interested in learning more about what we were doing and researching our program and the approaches we were using. And so finally, I had this PhD bug in the back of my head. And of course, I had the one side of my brain that was like, you don't need a PhD. You've already got an established career. You're busy. You're a mom. You're a wife. Just chill out. But then the other side of me was like, no, I want to know more. I want the degree. Now that I'm in higher ed, even though a master's is cool in forensic science, if you ever want to grow outside of that, you got to have a PhD. Outside of forensic science, everybody else in the higher ed space generally has a PhD. So if I want to make impact beyond my program, if I want to be in some type of higher level administration position eventually where I can really make more of an impact university wide, I've got to have the PhD. I'm not going to get that position with a master's, no matter how many years of teaching experience I have. Not to mention, as a full-time faculty member, I get 12 PhD credits a year free. So financially, it made sense. I wasn't going to have to pay for it. Of course, your time is money. I had to definitely give some thought to that. Like, do I really want to put my family through this? Because now I have two young kids and a husband. But I talked it over with my husband, and we just have a really great support system. In the city I live in, my mom and my sisters, we're all right in the same little cluster. My mom watches my kids, which is such a blessing. It's just all those different pieces of the puzzle that came together that in my head it said, well, I can at least try it because number one, it's not going to cost me any money financially. So if I take these classes and it doesn't work out, at least I wouldn't feel like a financial loss. And even time wise, I don't feel like it would be a time loss because every class I've taken, I feel is super relevant to what I do for my career. So if anything, it's like continuing education for me. So I don't really feel like it was a loss either way.
And are you currently the research mentor for undergrad or graduate students?
I'm the principal investigator for our forensic DNA laboratory. Since I've been at Mason, I've been the advisor for probably 10 or so different research projects. I have two master's students who I'm advising for their master's level thesis.
And how is it with you pursuing the research related to forensic science with now knowing you have to then conduct research related to you're currently getting your PhD in science education?
It's really interesting because once you step into that world of science education, it's been really interesting because sometimes it comes across as people don't really see you as a scientist anymore. It's like, now you're a social scientist. You don't count as a scientist anymore. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Now, for me, I feel like it's a little different because a lot of people who go into science education, they're no longer practicing science at all. They're purely just in the education space. But I think it's a little different for me because I do still actively run my own lab. I'm doing science research regularly. I'm still even doing some forensic casework on the side. But it's interesting because what I love is the science education research is so applicable to the science teaching and the science research that I do every day, because I learn things through my science education program that I can take back and apply to the way I'm teaching my students, whether it be in class or how I'm teaching them different research procedures and methodologies or whatever. So it's a really interesting position to be in. And I love it because I'll be in a class and I can say, oh my gosh, yeah, like this is totally relevant for the way I'm trying to get things across to my own students and learning ways to be more effective with them.
What would a day look like for you? Are you taking classes at nighttime while you're conducting research in the forensic science lab throughout the day and meetings?
I teach undergraduate and graduate courses. So my undergraduate class meets twice a week in the middle of the day. And then my graduate class that I teach is in the evening. And then I also sit in on graduate master's research presentations. So that's in the evening as well. And then I have 2 PhD classes that I take during the semester. And so those 2 classes are in the evenings also. So generally, the 4:30 to 7:10 slot is taken up for me just about every single day, either by my own PhD class or a class that I'm teaching or a class that I'm sitting in on because we have graduate student research presentations. So the pandemic, actually, as awful as it's been really nice to be able to do that from home, because normally that means I don't get home until 8:30 every night. And when you have little ones, that's a tough time to get home. But the good thing is that means I generally don't go in until later in the day. So my day normally doesn't start until 10 or 11 o'clock is when I would normally get to campus. Generally in the morning, I try to tackle my most pressing things first, whatever is super important for me to get done that day, which is generally not email. I try to avoid doing email first thing in the morning. Because at this point, the nice thing about being a research advisor is you don't really have to do a lot of the lab work yourself, which is nice. So I hire competent laboratory managers who I have trained, and now they can go on and train other students. Every once in a while, I need to go into the lab and help them out with whatever. That's pretty rare because when you hire a good team, I have GTAs that help me run the lab and do a lot of the heavy lifting for me. Any type of administrative stuff that needs to be done, whether there's paperwork that needs to be done for the lab. So I do have to do a lot of that stuff, obviously, as the PI. So making sure that our lab isn't having any type of violations or doing IRB submissions. I feel like I'm doing an IRB every other week. When you're in DNA research, especially, I mean, that's just, you're always doing something with that. I spend a lot of time preparing for my lectures. So I feel like a lot of students probably don't know how much time faculty members spend either preparing to do their lectures or preparing for activities in their courses, because I like to do a lot of what you call flipped classroom sessions, meaning the students do a lot of prep work outside of class. And then when you get into the class, you're doing more interactive stuff. So you're doing assignments, problems, case studies. All that takes a lot of time to prepare. So I may take some time to do that. And then, of course, there's meetings. That was one thing I was not prepared for when I left the crime lab, because we rarely had meetings in the crime lab. Maybe once a month we had like a unit meeting, but in the academia space, Lord, every day, multiple times a day. There's a meeting for everything. Like, so I fill a lot of my day up with meetings and then eventually get into the plethora of emails that I end up getting in my inbox every day. So after my 4:30 to 7:10 block is done, then, I get home, get kids ready for bed, and then I finally get to start PhD work at night. Then finally, once I'm home, I get to spend a couple hours doing reading or whatever work I need to do for my own PhD classes and getting into the bed eventually 11 o'clock, midnight.
It sounds like it, because even in the morning time, you didn't even bring up the fact of, yes, you put the babies to bed at night, but you didn't talk about the morning of like, now they wake up. So all of the things. And then plus before all of that, you're getting your children together in the morning and getting the house together.
That's the whole thing, especially now that my oldest is in second grade. And so he starts his school day at 9:30. We try to wake him up by 8, get him dressed, breakfast, brush teeth, all that good stuff. And then I have to get him settled by 9:30. And what a lot of people don't realize about these younger kids who are doing virtual school is there's no just like, let me give you your work and I'm out. He's 7. So there's nothing that's independent about the independent work that teachers assign to these kids. Everything that he does, he has questions about, or I have to make sure he's not playing his Nintendo Switch under the table instead of doing his journal writing. Half the time, like I said, I normally start my workday at 10. So I may be in a meeting at 10 and have to turn my video off and turn around and go crazy mom on him, like, put that switch, put it down. Meanwhile, someone's on the thing like, Kelly, did you hear that? We had a question. I was like, okay, sorry, I'm back. That can definitely get crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it sounds like you're doing 3 jobs at one time. That is very intense, but you seem to be figuring it out on a day-to-day basis, because on top of all of that, you're still providing us with the great content on the social media. I appreciate that, because I know when you have so much going on in your day-to-day life, that can easily go to the back burner. But you spoke a little bit about Kelly the Scientist Instagram page. What was your inspiration for starting that?
I just really felt like I was approaching a space where I wasn't using social media in a way that was healthy. And I didn't feel like my feed was feeding me. It was more so like Kim Kardashian. And it was fun entertainment, but I started craving a more inspirational type feed and wanting to surround myself with people who I could really see myself in. So like other women in STEM, other mothers. And then I realized that not only did I want to see more of that on my own feed, but I felt like I had reached a point in my career where I could do a little of that myself, where I could share more about what I did in my day-to-day basis, because just like how I never saw a lot of Black women in STEM, I realized, well, I am now. I guess I would consider myself to be a successful Black woman in STEM. So I feel like people could maybe engage with me in that aspect of my life, and I could share more about what my day-to-day is like. Because everybody kind of has their own way that they approach stuff. So like some people are like strictly STEM, nothing personal. Some people are the exact opposite. It's all personal and just a splash of science. And I kind of do a mix just because I just really wanted to share my whole authentic self. So I wanted to share the science stuff, but I also wanted people to see the stuff that I deal with being a mom.
That you can be a real person and a scientist at the same time.
Oh, yeah, a whole person. It's been good, but I tell you, I struggle with it sometimes. I end up having these really weird moments where I'll post something personal and it'll get like a lot of attention. And I all of a sudden have this drawback moment of wanting to delete it. And I'm like, oh God, it got too personal. This is too much. Like, I didn't expect this much attention to it, because now at this point, I have students who follow me. I have coworkers who follow me, and I struggle with the boundaries of how much am I comfortable with them knowing about me, because as a Black woman in academia, it's really hard garnering the respect of students and coworkers, and just being in that identity is hard. And so then once they see you outside of that and they see this personal side to you where you're more than just STEM, you have all these other things going on, in my head, I'm like, great, now they're really not going to take me serious. I'm already having a hard time making sure that they just see me for an intellectual academic. And now I've given them space to see me as someone in a bathing suit or someone who drinks every once in a while. And I struggle with knowing what's too much, what's too little, and then kind of the after effect of people knowing some of the personal stuff. But then I get all these messages where people are like, thank you so much for sharing that. It meant so much to me. You have no idea how much it inspired me, because I'm going through the same thing. You almost feel like this moral responsibility to continue. It's like, well, dang, I can't stop now. I'm like legitimately helping people.
Yes, it's very hard to figure out what do you and don't you share. You're very open as a mom. It's so cute. Like when your babies are in the back, you're like, look at my office mate. Every time my heart just melts. And then you'll have your meetings. Even when you meet with us for STEM Noir, you have the classroom as the background. And then your son kind of walks up like, I was like, the classroom is empty, but your son just looked like a student walking up from the classroom.
Oh, and that's how all day long I could be in a meeting with the president of the university, and my son will roll up in the camera like, hi, I'm an engineer. I'm like, what? Go sit down. And I mean, thankfully, my job has been super supportive of working parents and understanding that this is just the reality right now. But I know there are a lot of people who are not in the same position, because I have a family member who literally asked to either find something to do with your kids and work here or you're out. It was no give. Like, some of these jobs, they don't care if you're trying to work full time and watch your multiple children and balance their virtual school. Some of these places are just being ruthless and not understanding it at all. But I'm really grateful that my job has been really supportive in that aspect, and my students have been very understanding as well, because I've heard a coworker of mine, someone actually wrote on her Rate My Professor thing, which is why I hate that website. But someone wrote on a Rate My Professor, like, her son is always loud in the background or something. And I'm like, y'all are just, what? Just silly. Her son, I think, he's younger than my oldest. I want to say like 4 or 5. And I'm like, she cannot help that. She's doing the best she can. And that's really one of the reasons why I ended up doing a lot of pre-recorded lectures for my classes, because I knew I was going to have that issue with trying to balance the child care with live lectures. So I do live lectures occasionally, because I run a hybrid format where I have some pre-recorded stuff and I have some stuff that's more interactive, because I do think that component for a lot of students is important, because they miss that live interaction with their classmates and their teachers. But I did a lot of the pre-recorded content because, number one, I thought with me that would work. But then I also noticed I had students who couldn't come back in the country. I had one student in my class who she was taking classes in the middle of the night. She was in Pakistan. And I'll never forget one of my first lectures. She was like, it's 2 a.m. here. And I was like, oh my gosh. So just thinking about that, and the other students who also were like, they were forced to work full time during the day, or they had to watch younger siblings. And so I just felt like going to the pre-recorded format was better for a lot of students, because it gave them that flexibility to watch the content when it worked for them, because this pandemic just changed everything for everybody.
What do you think has been the greatest gift of working from home?
There's been a couple. One of the top ones for me, and I talk about this on my page, is I was diagnosed with sarcoma last December. And I started chemotherapy in February. And just being able to go through that whole process from home was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because I cannot even imagine being able to go through all of that and still be showing up to campus for live lectures or labs or whatever. I just couldn't even imagine that. So that for me was definitely at the top of my list. But as stressful as virtual schooling with my son is, I've really enjoyed being able to see his growth and his progress in school more than I would normally see it if he was actually in school, and also do things with him that I can kind of push him a little bit more, since I'm more in control of his learning than I would if he were in school. For example, they spent several weeks on these same first grade words, and my son knew them the first week. And I was like, oh, well, we going on the third grade words. Oh, we going on the fourth grade words. Because when you're in a big class, you got to do what everybody else is doing. And so that can kind of hold you back. And I was like, oh, we not still doing we gonna move on to the next. So that's been really good. And just being able to spend more time with family, less time in traffic. I try to look at those as the pros of the pandemic. Of course, there's a million cons to balance that out.
You were open on your page too about being diagnosed with sarcoma. I want to know, are you comfortable with kind of sharing your journey with treatment while being a PhD student plus professor plus mom plus wife plus all of the things and still getting it all done? You did not take a long break to recover. You kind of just kept pushing through while in your recovery. Why did you choose to continue on and not take a semester off for school and a semester off from work while you were being treated?
With both situations, the one I look at when I started chemotherapy in the middle of the spring, and then when I had my surgery in the middle of the fall, both of those things happened smack dab in the middle of the semester. I didn't know before the spring semester that I was going to be starting chemotherapy. I didn't know before the fall semester that I was going to end up having surgery. Now, what I did know in the spring, I was officially diagnosed at the end of December 2019. And that was the same time that I had received my acceptance to the doctoral program. So I could have been like, all right, I'm going to take this semester off. When I was first diagnosed, it wasn't anything where they were like, you're going to die tomorrow. It wasn't anything where it was life-threatening or anything that I felt like required me to put a complete halt on my life. And for me, staying busy helps me to not think about stuff like that. And so I was like, I don't want to just stop and just harp on my medical situation. I just wanted to continue with life as normal. And in my head, I was like, if things get bad enough that I need to step back, then I'll step back. I'll come out and I'll take a medical leave of absence, or I'll find somebody else to teach my classes. But we didn't ramp up with the chemotherapy treatment until March. I'll never forget this moment. They had started me out on another treatment in December when they found out. And then I had an MRI in February. And I remember I had been waiting all day for the call from my doctor because we were hoping that we would have some evidence that the treatment was working. And I was in the middle of one of my PhD classes, and I saw the call come through on my phone, and it was right before 5 o'clock. And I was like, I got to take this call, because if I don't take it, I'm not going to be able to talk to my doctor until tomorrow, probably, because she's about to go off. So I excused myself from class, and I went out in the hallway, and my oncologist told me the bad news that the tumor had grown about 30%. So she was going to need me to start on chemo as soon as we could. And I just remember going back into that PhD class and my professor asking me some question about some theoretical framework or something. And I just stared at her like, I was like, I don't even know my name right now. Like, I'm just looking at her like, and I pulled some kind of crazy answer out. So then I actually started chemotherapy the week of spring break, which was right when the pandemic hit, which was crazy. The timing was like, what? And I mean, we had no idea how I was going to respond physically to it because everybody responds differently to chemotherapy. Some have symptoms that knock them out completely. They can't do anything. And some people tolerate it a little bit better. So I was like, well, let's just go with it and let's see how it proceeds. But then our classes got switched virtual. And I never felt like my symptoms were bad enough that I couldn't continue with what I was doing work-wise and with my classes. I actually felt like it was better because it kept my mind off of it. And then in the fall, same situation. I didn't know that I was going to end up having surgery. I had been on the chemo for 6 months and they were hoping that it was going to shrink the tumor. And then beginning of September, I went for an MRI and they were like, yep, no, it's not shrinking. So they said I could stay on the chemotherapy or I could have the surgery. And I was like, mm-mm. Honestly, it took me a while to get to that point because I was deathly afraid of having surgery. But my husband and my mom, they were just really, really against me staying on chemotherapy any longer because they were like, that stuff is not good for your body. You need to just come off. So I made the decision to just stick with what I was doing because number one, again, everything was virtual and a lot of my content for like my courses, I had already established it in a way that I felt it would be easy for me to continue on with that because I could lay in the bed and run my courses virtually. And then I also brought it to the attention of my professors, and they were both super, super understanding and flexible. That also helped me with the decision to continue on because even one of my faculty members, she was like, look, don't worry about it. If you don't finish the stuff for this semester, don't stress. You can take it incomplete and we'll finish your stuff in the spring. So after I realized I had their support, I was like, well, I'm just going to keep chugging because the thing is, I'm not trying to be in this PhD program for 15 years. I said, I'm just going to keep going and we'll see what happens. And with the grace of God, I was able to knock it out. And my recovery wasn't awful, which was a blessing. I mean, I had a couple weeks of really bad pain and stuff, but I had medications to help me get through that. And again, I didn't have to leave my house. So I was still able to kind of keep chugging along with my normal life and take pain meds and rest when I needed to.
Do you feel like you've had any lifestyle changes since going through treatment?
I definitely don't drink as much as I used to. I used to have a glass to settle me in the evening, but I've definitely tried to cut back on that. Try to make sure I take my vitamins every day and eat as healthy as possible. It's hard because we're staying with my mom right now and she cooks like a traditional Black Southern mama. So she makes it hard sometimes to eat as healthy as we want to eat, but definitely trying to be more mindful of what we put in our body for sure.
Have you been more intentional about looking at the chemicals you're putting on your body as well?
No, but I should. I just recently had told my husband that I wanted to start looking more into some of the skincare products that I was using, not just for cancer purposes, but just in general, because I told him, I said, I'm not getting any younger and I'm kind of behind on taking care of my skin. And I do in general want to be more mindful of how I'm caring for my skin on a day-to-day basis and what products I'm using and not necessarily trusting that everything on a shelf is necessarily good for you. So just recently, like in the last couple of weeks, I had started researching what type of products other people were using that were good for you. Like I told him that's what I wanted for Christmas, actually. I told him, I said, I want you to get me a facial steamer. And there were some other things that I saw Jada Pinkett had posted.
We love us some Jada advice.
Yeah, because her skin looks amazing. So I was like, I need to see what she's using.
Do you think your relationship with others or the way that people have treated you specifically when it comes to being at work and or in the workspace, has that changed at all since having to share that side of you?
No, because you know what? For a while, nobody knew at my job. I had only shared it with my supervisor just because I felt like she needed to know that potentially at any given time, I could have to peace out from my courses. And so from the time I was diagnosed, I let her know so that if during the spring I needed to drop out, I just wanted her to know that I had plans in place because I care too much about my students and my classes to just be like, and I'm out. From the moment I was diagnosed, I had backup stuff set, and I just wanted her to know that if I needed to, for whatever, drop out, that I had things in place. I told the rest of the people in my department, I think shortly after the pandemic began, just because we were still in a space where we were potentially going to be going back to school. And I wanted them to know that I was going to be starting chemo. And so I was in that high risk group of people that at the time, those were like the only people who were being advised to stay. So they knew, but then I didn't really tell anybody else outside of that. And I had waited for a while to share it on social media too. I think I shared it like 6 months in to the diagnosis because it is one of those things where you're afraid that it will define you once people know that about you. Like they'll start seeing you as somebody who's sick. It really benefited me in the sense that people weren't seeing me. They weren't seeing the fact that my hair was falling out and all this other stuff that I was, running to the bathroom and throwing up or, going to the bathroom every other minute. People weren't seeing that. So even though they knew a couple months in, because normally if you see somebody who's going through stuff like this, you can look at them and be like, oh yeah, they sick. They going through something. But I was able to kind of conceal that because I was virtual. And when I did come camera on, I had my wig on or I was still beating my face every day. So I was trying not to look like the way I felt. So I don't think people even assumed that there was anything wrong with me. So I didn't really have to deal with people treating me any differently.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your PhD research and what do you expect the impact to be?
I had mentioned earlier that I co-founded a STEM program for underrepresented girls. It's called Focus, Females of Color and Those Underrepresented in STEM. It started out as a program for middle school girls. Now we have an academy version of it for high school girls. And really, this was another one of the driving factors for getting a PhD because I started doing some kind of low-level research on this program when we started it in 2014. We started doing some assessments. In my head, it's always been a built-in dissertation for me. Clearly, I already have the program. I already have the participants and all this stuff in place. So this is going to be what I center my dissertation around. And really what I want to look at is out-of-school STEM programs such as ours. How effective is that in impacting different areas that affect underrepresented girls in STEM, such as STEM identity or their ability to access opportunities to learn? How effective are these programs in improving those things? Ultimately, how effective are we in maintaining STEM persistence? Because what I've noticed in the research is there's a lot of research out there that talks about these are all the problems affecting underrepresented students in STEM. And there's historically a low number of women of color in STEM. And we know all of that. But what I'm more interested in is what are some practical solutions for not just sparking interest and getting them engaged and getting them motivated, but how do we make that translate into women of color in STEM careers? How do we go from middle school Kelly, who likes STEM because she attended a fun STEM program, to now middle school Kelly is going to major in a STEM field and ultimately get a STEM career? So that's what I'm really interested in. How do we solidify that pipeline?
That's very interesting, and I can see the impact of that because then we can kind of help to shape our girls into successful STEM careers. What can we expect from you in the future?
I am getting more into the consulting space. So education consulting, curriculum consulting. I just recently firmed up a contract to lead some continuing education workshops in 2021, forensic science workshops. So people who need to generalize education in the field. I'd also like to do some more informal learning activities in forensic science, like how do I put some of this forensic science stuff online so that students who want to learn about forensic science from home, especially given, the pandemic, how can I engage with them in forensic science virtually? So definitely things that I'm considering for 2021, because I definitely need to add more to my list.
We would like to connect with you after this episode. How can we do so?
I'm probably most active on my Instagram, and that's at Kelly the Scientist, Kelly with a Y. And I also have a website, www.kellythescientist.com. And my email is nightforensics@gmail.com. That's KNIGHT forensics@gmail.com.
Thank you so much for listening. If you want to connect with me, I am at The Research Her on all the socials. And until next time, I'll holla.